Hello everyone and welcome back to Tea Time Crochet, and today we're going to be working on this beautiful shawl that you see in front of me. It is called the Blystone Shawl. It is a triangle shawl that is worked in all puff stitches, so it's quite beautiful, and I have worked it up in Lion Brand's mandala, but you can always use just regular worsted weight yarn. Any worsted weight yarn will work. So this is what it looks like from the front. And this is what it looks like in the back. You can really see those nice puff stitches. And I think it turned out really, really nice. Like I said, I used one skein of Lion Brand mandala, and it came out a pretty good size. You could use any type of worsted weight yarn that you would like. And if you're going to use like a Red Heart Super Saver, you'll probably need 2 skeins because the Lion Brand mandala yarn has a higher yardage, so just keep that in mind. And it's a really simple shawl. I can't say that it works up really quickly because it is puff stitches, and puff stitches do take a little bit more time, but it is worth the effort. It's quite beautiful. And if you do like what I did here, I used like a gradient yarn, which is what the mandala yarn is. It kind of gradiates from one color to the next. Or a self-striping yarn, it would turn out beautifully. So those are just some options. Or you could do it all in one solid color. You could do variegated. It's completely up to you. And it will turn out beautiful pretty much any color or yarn type that you use. So I'm going to go ahead and get to the tutorial now. Okay, so you're going to get whatever yarn it is that you chose. I just have some scrap yarn here since I am just doing a sample piece, because the shawl that once we reach a certain row in the shawl, you're just going to be repeating yourself over and over again after that. So I'm only going to work up to that point because that's really all the video tutorial that you need. By then you'll have, down pat what you're supposed to be doing, and then you just repeat it until you get to the length that you would like. Like I said, so you're going to need your yarn. For my shawl that you've seen in the intro, I did 24 rows, and I used 1 skein of Lion Brand mandala. Now if you're going to use a regular worsted weight like a Red Heart Super Saver, you're probably going to need 2 skeins of that. You probably won't use all 2 of them unless you want a larger shawl than what I made, but you probably will need at least 2 of them because the mandala yarn has a higher yardage than what your average skein has. So go ahead and choose whatever yarn you're going to use, and then you're going to need a 6.5 millimeter crochet hook. Now the mandala yarn is considered a number 3 lightweight, so I used it just like it was a worsted. I used the same size hook. So if you're going to use a number 3 or number 4 weight, you can use the same size hook and it'll turn out perfectly fine. Because we want our shawl to be kind of drapey, we don't want it to be really tight and stiff. But if you're going to go to any yarn that's smaller than this size, I would definitely go up a couple hook sizes from what it's recommended for that size. So let's say if you're going to use a number 2 fingering weight, you would look on the label and figure out what hook they suggest you use and go up 1 to 2 hook sizes. So definitely keep that in mind. But if you are using the mandala, go ahead and use a 6.5 millimeter crochet hook. So I will be referring to my notes for this pattern because it has been a little bit since I wrote the pattern up and I had to work the shawl, and I will warn you, this is not a shawl that you'll work up really fast because it's full of puff stitches. So just keep that in mind. It is going to be a shawl that you are going to have to spend a little time on. But it turned out beautifully, so it's worth the time that you spend. So we're going to start with a slip knot. And we are going to chain 3. And remember, you don't want your chains to be super tight because you won't be able to get back into them. So 1, 2, and 3. We're going to slip stitch into this beginning stitch to form a ring. And with this pattern, I'm assuming that you know all the basic stitches. I will be be putting up a basic stitch tutorial soon. I wanted to go ahead and film this one first, just so you guys kind of get an idea of what my patterns look like. So we've slip stitched. You're going to pull that a little tighter so there's no gap there. And this is where I differ from most people. I don't do a chain 2 or a chain 3. I just simply chain 1 and then go directly into the stitch that I'm working. So that may confuse a lot of people, but just remember that this chain 1 that you're beginning with doesn't even exist. We're pretending like it's not even there. The only reason we're doing it is to get a little higher so our double crochet will lay right. So we're going to go into that ring with a double crochet. So see, you won't even notice that that's really there. And when you go to work in this stitch again, you work in the top of the double crochet, not down here. So we need to put 2 more double crochets into that ring, and we're working over our tail as we do this. So that's 1 and 2 and we're going to chain 3. So 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to put 3 more double crochets into that ring. So 1, 2, and 3. And that is what you should have so far. So that is the end of row 1, and you're just going to give this a little tug, your end here, to close up that ring so our shawl lays nice and flat across the top. So we're going to chain 1 and turn. And in this first stitch, we're going to put 2 double crochets. So that's 1 and 2. And then in the next 2 stitches, we're going to put 1 double crochet. So 1 in the next stitch, and 1 in the next stitch after that. And then in this chain 3 space is always going to be the same no matter what you're doing. So you're going to put 3 double crochets, chain 3, 3 double crochets all into this space. So that's 3 double crochets, 1, 2, and 3. Go ahead and scrunch that over, and we're going to chain 3 times. So 1, 2, and 3. And then 3 more double crochets into the same space. So there's 3. And that is what your corner space, when you're working in the chain 3 space where the hole's at, that is going to be the same section that you're going to do for every row. You will always, in that section, you will do a 3 double crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet. That will never change. So in the next 2 stitches, we're going to put 1 double crochet. And then in the last stitch, we're going to put 2 double crochets because we want to increase our shawl. So we increase at the beginning and increase at the end. And then we're also increasing down here where we add those corner spaces. So that's 1 and 2. Okay, so for the next row, row 3, we're going to chain 1 and turn. We're going to put 2 double crochets into that beginning stitch. Then we're going to chain 1 and skip 1. So we're going to skip the next stitch, and in the stitch after that, we are going to put a puff stitch. So for a puff stitch, you're going to yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, go through 2, going to yarn over, pull up a loop, go through 2, that's 3 loops on the hook, and you're going to repeat that until you have 5 loops on the hook. So yarn over, now I have 5 loops. It's a total of 4 times that you're doing that. And this is going to create our puff stitch. So once we have our 5 loops on the hook, we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 of those loops. And then we are going to yarn over and pull through that last loop to close the puff stitch. Now, that stitch we just did is only to close up the puff stitch. It is part of the puff stitch. It doesn't count as anything extra. So, because I don't want that, because the next step is a chain 1, and I don't want you to think you're chaining 2 here because you're not. That chaining 1 right there that you did to close your puff stitch is part of the puff stitch itself. So just keep that in mind. And this we're going to chain 1 and we're going to skip the next stitch, and in the next stitch we're going to do another puff stitch. So you're going to yarn over, go into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, go through the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, go through 2, and that's a total of 5 loops on our hook, and a total of 4 times that you've done that. So you're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 of those loops, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through that last loop and pull that really tight to close up our puff stitch, and then we're going to chain 1. We're going to skip the next one, and you'll wind up on the last stitch right before your chain 3. So we're going to yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, go through 2, yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, and you should have a total of 5 on your stitch, or on your hook. So you're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 of those, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through that loop to close up your puff stitch. And you're still going to chain 1 here, so chain 1, and then we're going to be working our corner stitches, which are 3 double crochets into that chain 3 space. So that's 1, 2, and 3. You want to pull your work over, and you're going to chain 3, 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 more double crochets into that space. Here's 3, and you're going to chain 1 because we want this side to mirror the other side, and we know that we did a puff stitch in that last stitch here, so we need to put a puff stitch in this stitch. So I have 5 loops on my hook. I'm going to go ahead and close up that puff stitch, and I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to skip the next one, and in the next one I'm going to do another puff stitch. So that's 5 loops on the hook. I'm going to go ahead and close my puff stitch up, chain 1. We're going to skip the next stitch, and in the stitch after that is another puff stitch. So I have 5 loops on my hook. I'm going to go ahead and close up that puff stitch and chain 1, and that will put you at your last stitch. So you're going to put 2 double crochets into that last stitch there, and that should be what you have so far. And you're just going to repeat this row until your shawl gets the length that you want it to be. So I'm going to do one more row with you. So we're going to chain 1 and turn, and we're going to put our 2 double crochets into that beginning stitch. And then we're going to chain 1, skip 1, and that will put you at this chain 1 space. And you're going to, and in that chain 1 space, you're going to put your puff stitch. So and then I'm going to chain 1 again, and that, so we're going to skip the next stitch, which will be the puff stitch that we made, and we're going to work into that chain 1 space. So once you're on the puff stitch row, you can pretty much just look and see where your puff stitch needs to go, because it's always going to go in this chain 1 space. As long as you remember that, you'll be fine. Because after you do, you know, a couple hundred of these puff stitches that are probably in this shawl, you're going to want to just be able to save time by just glancing and not having to count. So I have 5 loops on my hook. I'm going to go ahead and close up the puff stitch with a slip stitch. I'm going to chain 1, skip 1, which is our puff stitch, and work another puff stitch into that chain 1 space. And chain 1, skip 1, which is our puff stitch, and into the chain 1 space we're going to put another puff stitch. So we're going to skip the next one, and in that middle double crochet there we're going to put our puff stitch. you're going to close up your puff stitch and chain 1. You're going to skip the next one, and you are at your corner space, so you know that you need to put 3 double crochets, chain 3, 3 double crochets into that space. So that's 3 double crochets, chain 3, and 3 double crochets. And you just want to make sure that your other side mirrors this side. So we're going to chain 1, skip 1, and in that middle double crochet here we're going to put our puff stitch. As long as you remember that you're working your puff stitch, chaining 1, skipping 1, and then working into the next one, you should be perfectly fine. So I chained 1, I'm going to skip this next stitch and work into this chain 1 space with another puff stitch. So I have 5 loops on the hook. Go ahead and close up my puff stitch and chain 1. So I'm going to skip 1 and work my puff stitch into that chain 1 space. I'm going to close up my puff stitch, chain 1, skip 1, and work into that chain 1 space with another puff stitch. And I'm going to chain 1, skip 1, and work into that next chain 1 space with a puff stitch. I'm going to chain 1 and skip the next one, and I'm at my last stitch, so I know I need to put 2 double crochets into that stitch. And you are just going to repeat that until the length of your shawl. So like I said, mine was 24 inches, or mine was 24 rows. Yours can be more if you would like. I probably wouldn't go any smaller than that because you wouldn't be able to wrap it around yourself. But if you want to do more rows than that, you're perfectly capable of doing that. So I'm going to work one more row with you just so you understand. So we're going to chain 1 and turn. We're going to put our 2 beginning double crochets into that stitch, that first stitch. And then we're going to chain 1, skip 1, which puts us at the chain 1 space. We're going to put our puff stitch in that chain 1 space. So I have 5 loops on my hook. I'm going to chain 1, skip 1, which is the next stitch, is the puff stitch, and then we're going to work into that chain 1 space, which is the stitch that's after that, with another puff stitch. If you guys need a more in-depth tutorial on puff stitches, just, leave me a comment or and I'll gladly do like a how-to on puff stitches and take a little more time on them. So I chained one, I'm going to skip the next one and work my puff stitch into that chain one space. So close up my puff stitch, chain one, skip one, so I'm going to chain one, skip one, and work my next puff stitch into this chain one space. And chain one, skip one, and work your puff stitch into the chain one space. Chain one, skip one, work into the chain one space, the puff stitch. So now we're to our corner stitches here, so we're going to continue on in our pattern. So you did your puff stitch, you're going to chain one, you're going to skip one, and in that next stitch you're going to do a puff stitch. And you're going to chain one, skip one, and that's going to put you in your corner space. So you're going to do your corner stitches, which is 3 double crochets, chain 3, 3 double crochets, all into that space. So 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 more double crochets. And we're going to chain one, skip one, and put our puff stitch in that next stitch, and that is our pattern for the rest of the shawl. So chain one, skip one, and into that next space you're going to put your puff stitch. Chain one, skip one, work your puff stitch in the next space. So I chained one, I'm going to skip the next one, and in that next space I'm going to put my puff stitch. Oops, I almost lost my stitch there. Then we're going to chain one, skip one, and in the next space work our puff stitch. chain one, skip one, work our puff stitch in the next space. So chain one, skip one, and this will be our last puff stitch. You're going to chain one, skip one, and in that last stitch you're going to put your 2 double crochets. And that is what you will repeat for the entirety of the shawl. So I think it's quite pretty. Like I said, if you guys have any questions about the puff stitches and you would like me to do a more in-depth tutorial on just how to do the puff stitches, where I can take a little more time and go through it, definitely, shoot me a message and I will gladly do that. But like I said, this is what you repeat over and over again until your shawl gets the length that you want it to be. Mine with the mandala yarn was 24 rows long. You can gladly go more than that. It just depends on the size of shawl that you want. I normally just eyeball it. If I know that I like my shawls to be at least a certain length to be able to wear it a certain way, and you can always try it on as you're wearing it, or as you're working it up. You can always try it on however you wear your shawls, whether you wear them like a normal shawl or you wear them more like a cowl, or however you wear them. And you can kind of measure from there to be able to know how long you need your shawl to be. But like I said, mine was a minimum of 24 inches or 24 rows long. So definitely just, keep measuring, and you'll know when it's the right length. So just repeat this row until your shawl gets the length that you need it to be. So from here you'll chain one and turn, and then you'll do your beginning double crochets, chain one, skip one, and then do your puff stitch. And you'll repeat that all the way till the corner. And in the corner you will do your 3 double crochets, chain 3 double crochets, all in the chain one space. And then you'll chain one, skip one, and work your puff stitch in that next stitch. And then, chain one, skip one, all the way to the end. And then in that last stitch, you'll put your you'll put your double crochet, your 2 double crochets in the end stitch. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.